right. Welcome to edition number 2 of the Leadership Academy Book Club. This week we're reviewing and discussing Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. If you need a link to the Miro, here it is. Yeah. Just pre-recording, we were just talking about how Mimi was talking about how this book relates to Catalyst, especially in some of the processes where things seem really complex or unsolvable. Systems view is applicable. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. I think that's just in terms of systems theory and complexity, and then sort of getting into like a like painting yourself into a corner or into a paradox, that you may be in one of these system traps that Donella highlights in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I spent a lot of time distilling some of the systems traps out onto this board, just because I think that was kind of my aha moment, is like, oh my God, a lot of these apply in so many different areas and they're worth thinking about.
That was the highlight of the book for me as well. And did you, as I was getting ready for the club, I saw, because I think that you were listening to the audio book. I was also doing that. I was listening to the Audible audiobook, and they have a great summary, PDF.
Oh, they do. I haven't downloaded that.
Oh yeah, check it out. I was like, oh man, I've read the book 2 weeks ago, and I mean, it's really invaded my thinking. But I was like, oh, what? Because it's strange. It's it takes a bit of getting your mind around. And I found that summary, and she really details. Although it might just be cut directly from the book. I don't have a print copy. Mm-hmm. But they're very, very clearly stated, and I agree with putting them in the Miro board, because they spark ideas that are very practical, for what our purpose is, is to read these books and sort of relate them to our project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I did go through, and I got it Kindle version on my Mac. And they had these nice little call out sections of the different systems traps. So I just kind of screenshotted those and put them up here.
Oh, that's what those are. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So these are straight out of the Kindle. I guess the book would have them as well.
Can you post the link once more, please?
The link for the Miro board?
Yes.
All right.
Thanks.
There it is. Yeah, so just to orient us as we kick this off, I just put the link to the Miro in chat. This is the book club. We're focusing kind of on the business entrepreneur side of reading. And so this was funded in Fund 6 to hold 6 of these book clubs. So we're on book club number 2, and we have 4 more to go. And last time we covered Impact Networks by David Ehrlichman and had a nice discussion. The recording of that session is here, so I dropped it below the discussion board. So if you want to catch up and view the video, that's there. Today we'll be talking about thinking in systems. So we tried a little async board. I'll leave it open because I want to, if people come in afterwards and have ideas or thoughts, it'll be a nice place to just drop some thoughts or ideas or stickies. I also started experimenting with a tool called Loom, which will embed actually a short video, so you can talk about things and point to the board or create stickies as you talk, as you create your stickies. So that might be a really interesting additional dimension to doing some async stuff. But also, if you don't feel like recording a video, just feel free to leave a sticky or a link to a Google Doc or whatever works for you to share your thoughts. Totally open board. Feel free to jump in and add notes anytime. This is to be a living document that can be shared with Catalyst. So the opportunities for learning aren't just today or even this past month while we were reading the book. The intent is we can give this as kind of a gift to the community if people are interested in these different books, and kind of distill down our thoughts and experience with those things and how they apply to Project Catalyst. So yeah, I just put some thoughts up here, broke it into 3 big conversation areas. One is around systems themselves, and maybe talk about what we took away as what our systems, and kind of describe those. Could be helpful for those here that actually didn't read the book. Actually, quick show of hands, who actually read the whole book, and who is here because you're interested in the book?
I read this is Newman. I read the whole book, or listened to it. Yeah.
I have not read. I watched videos that the author, that Newman, posted on YouTube.
Haven't read it.
Read it. Okay, so it's about 50-50. That's awesome. So we'll kind of swing back and forth between kind of deep dives and higher level explanations of things. And does that sound like a good breakdown, kind of talking about systems, going into kind of the meat of it, which was for me too, was the systems, traps, and opportunities around there. And then maybe we can talk about and take notes really on how can systems thinking be relevant to Catalyst.
Yeah, I agree. That's a pretty good, agenda or flow.
Awesome. So why don't we jump into the first part for systems themselves? Like what did people take away? What's your understanding of what a system is?
I'll jump in. It's not as simple as it could be. I mean, her description is good, and I mean I could read it out. But the description that I've sort of taken is there's 2. One is the parable or the story of the blind men and the elephant, which was one of my very first sort of awakening stories, where I thought, oh, there's something else going on in the world. And just briefly, I don't know if you guys know the elephant and the blind men, but a group of blind people got the chance to see an elephant, and each one sort of went to the elephant and had an experience, felt the elephant, and came back and were like, oh, the elephant is the part that I felt. The elephant is the long tail, or the trunk, or the side, or the ear. And so they all had a different view of what the elephant was, but none of them kind of understood the whole of the elephant. So it sort of sets up the difference between a part and a whole. And then from Donella's, I can't remember if she gave this sort of analogy or it was somebody else. It could have been Russell Ackoff, who is a really fantastic sort of, you'll find him if you do searches on YouTube, because he seems to be a really popular, at least the algorithm given it to me. But it was about a car, and it says of all the pieces in the car, you can take that piece out and it is a part of a car, but it is not a car. And that none of the pieces can do what the whole car does. So it kind of rubs up into that the sum is greater than the parts type of thought. Yeah. So those are the 2 things that are sort of like what a system means to me, meaning it's a bunch of parts that do something bigger than the small parts put together, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found that an interesting part of the book too, when then they were talking about the elements of a system and then how they interrelate, and then kind of what's the function of the system. That kind of those 3 things kind of made a system. Like you could have elements, but if they don't have any kind of interconnections or a function, then it's not really a system. They're just a pile of stuff. Or
And I thought that was a good, and that's a really good thing. It's just like, what is a system and what is not a system? Yeah, the sort of, which sort of makes me think of early internet times and the whole idea of many pieces loosely joined, which was sort of a phrase that we used early on in the internet to sort of describe what it was and the relationships between it. So it's really the relationships are what you can focus in on, and those system maps, which are kind of complicated because I was listening to it, so I wasn't watching them. So then when I looked at the PDF, I was like, oof, those are not as like beautiful as what I painted in my mind.
Yeah, I put a couple of those maps here on the Miro board.
Yeah.
And yeah, that kind of takes me to another concept that was introduced, was the stock, which is kind of what makes a system resilient over time. Is there's like a source, and then there's an inflow and an outflow of something, and then the stock in the middle allows for the inflow and outflow not to be tied together. Like if it's just an inflow and outflow, if you shut off the inflow valve, the outflow stops. It's like a faucet or something. But if you have a stock, like you have a bathtub that's halfway full and you turn on the tap, and then you open the drain, if they're flowing at the same rate, the bathtub will stay at the same level of full. But if one goes faster or slower than the other, the level of the bathtub will change. But you have time to compensate. The stock gives you a buffer or a delay in effect before the stock is depleted or the stock overflows. So it's important in the feedback mechanism to give you time to get the feedback and then to adjust course. So it was an interesting kind of way of thinking about things. I haven't really thought about the stock as a integral thing to help with resilience and other things, and also as a mechanism for the feedback model. And she talked about one stock systems, kind of like this diagram: heat from the furnace, the stock is the room temperature, and then it leaks to the outside. So you can have kind of that feedback mechanism on a thermostat, and if the room gets too cold, it'll turn on the furnace and raise the temperature of the room again. If it gets too hot, it'll shut it off. So the room temperature is kind of the stock, but it can fluctuate up and down a bit.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, for me, is that you for instance, and I'll talk about my brother, he is someone that'll come in and turn on the thermostat all the way up, thinking that that's going to make the room hot, like hotter faster, that if you don't understand these systems concepts, which we learn because it's a very natural system. The thermostat is a great sort of analogy, and why that sort of learning thermostat was important. Is something that I noticed when it came out. The Nest thermostat is like, it's a thermostat that learns, and I was like, ooh, but I don't have one of them, but
yeah. But I think that's a really great point. Like the example of turning up the thermostat because you want it hotter faster is the wrong thing, because the thermostat's the feedback mechanism, and the only way to raise the room temperature faster is to change the inflow, which means your furnace has to work harder, or the outflow needs to stop.
Or the outflow needs to stop. Yeah, that was another concept that she says, look, there's a lot of people that only focus on inflow. They want more income, they want a bigger furnace, but they could also, and she does this with oil and the sort of environmental stock and environmental issues, is like you can prolong it. You can save the stock by decreasing the outflows and increasing the inflows. or that you've got two knobs basically. And it seems like folks have they've kind of focused on one knob. I don't know, you know, it's kind of, I say, let's find all the knobs. I say, let's find all the knobs, you know, all the faucets in this diagram. And then, you know, what about the cloud there? Those are called, those are the, I just read that this morning, and those are the, did I make a note of it? But that's another part of the system. And then the arrows are sort of relationships. The environmental, so the system, one of the interesting things about the systems that is a new idea for me is how we learn about systems. And I don't think it was Donella Meadows that talked about this, but it's if you give a kid a system or a thing, the first thing they do to understand it is to break it apart. So they take everything apart, and then they say, okay, so you have a car. I use the car analogy. So you take a car and you want to understand it, so you break it apart, and now you've got a carburetor. And so you want to understand that, and you take apart the carburetor, and you've got a valve. And then what is a valve? And you take apart the valve, and then you're like, so this is a reductionist. It sort of lends itself that this type of discovery, this type of learning lends itself to mechanistic thinking, because you're thinking about the parts. Now, and this does, I think, fit into like what are systems, you know, because they are made of parts, but the other, and in a real way, other direction is the context. So if you have a car, well, what is a car? Well, you could say it's made up of all these different parts. A car is a wheel and a carburetor and, you know, a steering wheel and a radio. But going the other way, what does a car do? So a car drives you to the store, you know, and then so your car rides on roads, and you can go farther and farther into the context. Like the car is also where all kinds of things like that happen in cars, or what car, you know, cars are, you know, personal identity, or cars are things that you work on the weekend, or cars are status symbols, and it sort of goes in the other direction of context. And the interesting thing, and this is a big epiphany that I had, is that those things continue to sort of on an infinite ray going out from each other, from the system. So the context of a system and the parts of a system. So if you forgive me, I'll hold on to the mic for just a second more. If we take Catalyst as a system, yes, it's made up of all these parts, and you can understand the parts. And that's a perfectly viable way to understand it. You know, elephant, you know, all the pieces, blind men, and it's not anyway, all the pieces and parts. But then there are also all these other things. It's not functional, but they use the term of context, going, oh, like what does it do, what its goal is, and what it does specifically that all the parts don't do specifically. And so I really like that as just a way of a new way of understanding things. And basically that going down, like investigating the parts, is called analysis, and then the other way is called synthesis. So going, you know, wider and wider context, relationships, building outward and towards wholeness is synthesis. Likewise, going the part analysis direction is mechanistic, and the other way is holistic. And I may be butchering that, I have no idea, but it's just so one of the things that real epiphanies that I had during the study.
That's beautiful. And yeah, I think there's no way to take things down to parts and look at a carburetor and from that understand what it feels like to drive on a nice sunny day with the window down, or what the G forces feel like as you take a sharp corner. It's like,
yeah, and I love this, but it does enhance my appreciation when I feel that Holley 4-barrel like open up, and I was like, oh, that's the sound of the, you know, the valve, and so it does. I think that it's sort of a recommendation for loving the parts, you know, but then also you've got to also appreciate the whole of the other side, like that windows down Tom Petty, song blaring, and like that type of, like that emotional. I guess that's the other thing, sort of emotional. The other, the axis, like going towards the emotional, because I mean, I can get emotional about a carburetor, but it's not really the car. Like I realize I'm projecting onto it, but there is an emotional thing to all this artistic, and here, Nora, here's my thing, is that the connection between the intellect and the parts and the mechanisms and the whole and the context and the emotional does not have to be separated. They are connected. Like I just don't. It's troublesome to me that we make this separation when it's just directions on the same path.
mm,
And in terms of catalyst, I think that it's important, just like someone that loves carburetors and valves and the intricacies and wonkiness, like that they still need to remember the context, the big picture, and likewise corollarily, the big picture thinkers and sort of wide artistic emotional should respect and sort of take account of the intellectual and the pieces parts. And there's certainly I wonder what the ratio in catalyst is, but those type of things, the systems are here, and they sort of represent and all the things that we deal with on a daily basis. The what is systems, what are systems going.
mhm,
Listening to the different faucets and inflow and outflow and analysis, I think there's level of depth of analysis that you can do, right? Which will require more time and resources and expertise. At simplest level, this takes me back to college years where there's differential equations, inflow and outflow, and all the different levers. And even in differential equations, right? There's the simple math, and then there's the more complicated math and more complicated systems. For me, when I think of systems, I think of like engineering systems, organizational systems, or like sales team systems, marketing systems, and not just like the technology, but people as well, and processes in it, right? And I know that even Catalyst can be thought of as a system, probably is a system. And when you have these more complex systems, it's really hard to think of it from like a math function or formula, right? But you can make assumptions, like even some solutions in differential equations make assumptions. Let's assume that this lever will not change, and then what happens, right? So let's assume that this engineer is going to produce about the same. This is the average. Then if I add one more engineer, how does that going to change right? Is 1 + 1 2, or is 1 + 1 1.5? And what else? What else do we need to add to make them more productive? And if we have teams of engineers to, would the project manager increase that, or is it, what will improve the system and what will break the system, or what has broken, right? And how that affected different parts. In terms of Catalyst, right? So many moving pieces. It is, I believe, moving towards a true decentralization. Of course, there are stronger nodes here and there, right?
Mhm.
But I see in a lot of the discussion, especially with the CA and VTA process, people are pointing out, like, different solutions, different problems and challenges that we have, right? And applying this kind of systematic analytical thinking to it to figure out, like, what should we prioritize on, right? What is the true bottleneck? And data is very important. And if you don't have data, then you can make educated assumptions and work around those. And then assumptions are we can oftentimes test, right? I don't know, like example, I had a debate on benevolent whales versus, selfish whales the other day, right? And let's say that the assumption was, hey, Cardano is a blockchain that focuses more on impact, and that would be like the general, that would be like a statement of assumption. Is it proven? Maybe there are evidence, and there's definitely evidence that suggests that, right? But like with more complex things, like complex math, there's no proofs even. So we just have to see, okay, with that assumption, then, does 1 ADA, 1 vote make sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or, and then you get into voting systems, quadratic voting, and whatever. Does quadratic voting make sense, right? And then you can compare different systems, like Cardano versus Ethereum versus Solana versus others, right? And see, you can rank, okay, Cardano is probably more focused on impact versus Ethereum and versus others. And therefore, some applications or some functions may make more sense for one ecosystem than others, right? As I would say, average person, I would probably say, for me, I'm trying to, it really, like, to think about these things, you really have to devote time and resources, right, to come to deep conclusions. It's not something that, you can wake up one day, if you're a genius, you probably could.
We're all
calculate
geniuses
everything.
here. That's us.
Right.
That's us. This
Yeah,
is a
that's
genius
right.
circle. Yeah. If you're here and listening to my voice, you have just become a genius, and you can wake up tomorrow and have it all figured out.
I've been blessed.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But it's like when they were talking about ecosystems, right? The salmon population, right, and overfishing and so on. So the policymakers, even people who did a lot of research and looked at all the levers and how everything relates to each other, there are important things that we can miss. And so it's very important to measure, right? Measure your assumptions over time, because things change, people change. Like, some things stay the same, and you'll see that clearly. Maybe they move up and down within the standard deviation or whatever the value is, but some things change, right? How does global warming affect these things. Like, yeah.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, there was a really great example in the book that reminds me of is they were talking about these bugs that every 6, 7, 10 years, their population explodes and they eat a bunch of trees. And in the East Coast, the trees, I think it was pine was the most desirable, and nobody paid attention to these bugs because they ate balsam and fir and cedar. But once the pine was all harvested and they had to go to the substandard trees, then they started to notice every 6 or 7 years, these bugs would come in and chew up all these cedar trees, which was really bad because there was less to harvest, and that reduced the profitability of the whole thing. So they started pesticiding to kill the bugs, and doing it more and more to combat, and it wasn't really working well. And when they started looking at it from a systems level, they discovered that these bugs actually love balsam the most, which is the least economically attractive tree. And the funny thing about balsam is it's a really strong tree. So given time, balsams will crowd out the cedar, the fir, the pine, and pretty soon you'll have a monoculture of just balsam because they're so successful and they crowd out the other trees. So these bugs were actually controlling the balsam. When the balsam exploded and became too predominant, these bugs would explode, eat all the balsam trees, and then once their favorite tree was down, their population would die back. So that was the cycle that was happening. But they happened to also eat other trees, which got concern from the people who wanted to pesticide. But by pesticiding, they were actually going against their own real long-term economic goals, because now the balsam trees would start to populate and take over the forest. And just not understanding that whole cycle and how the system works led to some very short-term thinking that actually harmed the long-term interests of the whole industry.
And it's interesting to think about the idea that Nin brought up, was that that experts and this sort of analysis and finding all of the parts and sort of trying to understand it and then make a decision, like the mistakes will still be made. Like what, and then what did he say? He said measure and verify assumptions. And why? Because things change. And so if I mean, I wonder how that revelation about the bugs and the balsam and the pine, like how they discovered it, and why they weren't like, why they didn't, like, the people that sold the pesticides, like, who were also the people who did the research and measured and verified the assumptions, the experts didn't, like, they kept looking at it and kept discovering, so that the cycle continued, their sort of scientific method cycle continued, as opposed to just like shutting everything down and then they like don't know why it's not working. Yeah. So it's basically, yeah. I love that. I love that story, because I think this idea of the way the complexity react, and that could be like a common pattern, and then we can look for it in other systems. And I think it's the adaptogenic pattern, meaning, do you guys know what an adaptogen is? It's like it's a certain type of herb. It's used in herbal medicine, like
ashwagandha.
Ashwagandha, exactly. Ashwagandha is like the one that I'm carrying with me. It's so important that I'm taking it with me on my bike trip, because it's supposed to help your immune system to a certain degree, but then when it's too high, like if you're having like too high of a reaction or too low of a reaction. And when I explained it to my buddy, he was like, that doesn't make sense. Like somehow magically the ashwagandha like just knows to raise or lower your system. And I was like, I don't think it works like that. But I don't know. I have a sneaky suspicion it's like those balsa loving insects, because they, the balsa wants to go one way in the system. It has a goal, and that and that the bugs sort of fight that goal and keep that sort of system in check, and then that helps the other forest, species get together. I guess what I'm saying is that there's a language and a perspective that this new sort of systems works. However, and this is a pitfall. Okay, this is a real pitfall, and this is from that movie Mind Walk. And I think Donella definitely puts it in I think in the very end of the book as like the pitfalls that we can use this system to just continue the mechanistic analysis and just try to get another thing that we just sort of not blindly use, but sort of without sort of the holistic perspective, that we can still use the little pieces, we can still stay in the little pieces part, and not sort of see the whole picture. And now that's not an indictment. I'm not trying to say, oh, blah, 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 but it is one of those pitfalls that I think it was in the book as well at the end, that this mindset, or that you can still use these tools without the change in mindset. And what these system thinkers talk about is that the real benefit is in this mindset shift, which is what we talked about in the first book, impact systems. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think systems are actually all around us every single day, right? Whether we realize it or not. They are a great vehicle to drive the desired outcome, right? Regardless of what's causing, let's say, the beetles to eat one tree or another, right? Or I was thinking, well, how do I, my wife's grandparents, they had a parenting style system where they say, I don't care what you do, this is the outcome that I need you to reach to, right? Which means don't no murder, steal, drugs, blah blah blah, right? And what kind of, whether it's there can be different paths to solution for sure, right? Depending on your assumptions, depending on whether you have you see all the hidden variables or not, right? Maybe you don't need all of them. You don't need to know why the bugs like one tree over another. As long as you can find the correct or the right variables to build towards the right solution. And variables can be components, right? Not just, I'm just thinking from math.
Well, when I think about variables, I think about those faucets. It's like, okay, I can turn the input to a 1
right.
to a half, and then I can turn the output 1 to a half. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about systems is these arrows are feedback mechanisms, which then change how we turn these faucets. So the feedback mechanisms themselves, especially in a multi-source system, start to get really complex and emergent. And that was one of the things that was mentioned, is you can't actually predict what's really going to happen. If it's complex enough, you need to prepare to be surprised, but you know that there's other things going on, and that you can think about it a different way rather than at a component level. So you have a little bit of a higher level appreciation. But also one of the things that was brought up was systems have resilience, and that's primarily, I think, to the stock, which leads to delays in changes, to give time for the feedback mechanisms to actually correct something before something's depleted or goes overboard. And then they mentioned that self-organization was a property of systems where things tend to self-organize, and then hierarchy evolves out of systems naturally, and not in a bad way, like in a command control kind of thing, but even like in snowflakes, you see kind of the crystals forming, and that's a form of some kind of hierarchy or design, or just the
Structure.
hierarchy of cells
Yeah.
to organs to human beings. There's a hierarchy of component parts there.
I like that. The cells to organs to whole bodies. Yeah, yeah.
And even in there, the self-organization is the cells take all these atoms and create a cell, and then they organize together to form organs, and then those organs organize into a body or a person. There's something going on there, and it's driven in our cells probably through DNA and other things like that. From a very simple kind of system of DNA, we have this massively complicated system that has both resilience, it self-organizes, and there's definitely hierarchies within our body.
Yeah, and you know, allow me to sort of think out loud for a second. What Nin was saying with oh, hold on, come on, thought, come on back to me. Oh, it was like a little, it was like a pet, it was like a dog, and I was like trying to pet, and it just trundled off away from me. There is or what we measure and what we verify, it, and that idea, so basically all that means to me is it's like, let's be observant, let's listen to catalysts, let's measure, let's really think about our design decisions. Like when we turn the faucet, actually an old guy working on cars, on carburetors, he told me this thing, he's like, dude, change one thing at a time, you know? And I was like, ooh. He's like, yeah, you're gonna just change a bunch of stuff and it's not gonna work and you're not gonna know. And I feel like this is the scientific method, but what I think it means for catalysts is like, let's really let's watch it and sort of try to understand it, and look for those little turning points or those little shifts, because it's not going to be as obvious because of this resilience and this resiliency thing, like when it shifts. Yeah, so that's a little bit of the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. You mean, I'm thinking, you know, just going back to my college years, right? The concept of, if you just look at 3 dimensions and local equilibriums, and you know, what is it called? Something, contour vectors, right? So let's say you have 3 faucets, right? That together will create a 3D map of how you turn the faucets, and that's how much volume you're gonna have, right? Flowing through the whole system. And so let's say that you're somewhere on the map, the catalyst is producing some impact, right? That's the outcome that we want to have. Then if we freeze one part and we just, you know, start moving across one direction and increase the CA process, or you know, get more proposals in, or get more funding, whatever the 3 variables that you want to look at, right? Are we moving up on the graph, right, or are we moving down? And I think most importantly is to consider, like, are we in just a local equilibrium, right? Are we just happy where we are, right? And then whatever you measure from a local equilibrium is going to be like, oh, this is going to be worse, right? Because you're going downhill from a small hill. But then you don't know that maybe a huge mountain is around a corner. Right. So I think maybe you mentioned like holistic analysis, kind of looking outside of, just the local measurement, like turning the faucet a little bit more and seeing if it's negative or positive output, right? But looking at like beyond just, and that's something that probably can be done by deeper research, probably, right? Crunching more numbers. I don't have answer, right? But but when I think of like, okay, like even for our engineering team, right? We have a bunch of engineers, and maybe Kanban style Scrum meetings. Scrum is the best. Maybe waterfall is better, right? And I get insight by talking to other leaders that are far ahead of me, right? And seeing what is the pros and cons and where they are and how and what if what they're doing is working for them and where they are, what they're optimizing for. So it's always an evolution, right? Ups and downs, going and optimizing something, trying something doesn't work, trying something that works, but at the same time being critical that, just because something works doesn't mean that there isn't something better that works even better.
Yeah.
I think and I'm mindful of the time. I unfortunately have to get going in the next bit. This has been a great conversation. I really do appreciate all the this is exactly what I had, and each time I see you guys, I really do appreciate it. It's just awesome.
Awesome. Maybe it's a good time to jump into the system traps and opportunities. The book outlined a bunch of different possible traps to systems, and they even named them like policy resistance or tragedy of the commons, drift to low performance, seeking the wrong goal, shifting the burden to the intervener, rule beating, escalation, and success to the successful. And I'm wondering, are there any of these that you're seeing manifest in Catalyst that maybe we should uncover and talk about? Like there's a lot here, but I see some of the stuff like success to the successful is kind of a built-in systemic bias, I think, in the way our society works. Like you're even seeing it in Catalyst. Like there's some successful proposals and they get reputation in the system, and then they put in a new proposal and people just naturally vote for it because they were successful before. And does that lead to a system where the successful become more successful over time, and then the newcomers don't get the funding and are left out? And is that something we need to look at? And,
I definitely see that as one of the traps. That was one that sort of picked out to me, and I think it was one of the things that we talked about in the last book. The basically the concept of the zero-sum game, and how and why that would work. I wonder, and actually, I think Nin is all about the quadratic voting. Like our voting style is sort of that sort of binary thing. And the way she explains it, it's like a stock where like two people try to fight for the same stock. And again, that's that sort of idea about where just looking at it in this way, it sort of helps. It's like a third party mediation. It's just like, okay, we get to logger, two parties, two agents, two parts of the system get into loggerheads. And then if you kind of give them a break and say, well, look at it from this perspective, and then it's not a problem with me, it's a problem with this stock, that we've got, that we were both fighting over, or we both need to accomplish our goals. So I do think that the voting may be, like you say, Nori, like just a systemic sort of the air that we breathe in this society. And I do think that these traps are probably here because of that unexamined assumption of just the way that we do things, and which actually falls back to, you know, this other idea of the, you know, let's verify and measure our assumption. But with that, I will leave you guys to answer these wonderful things. This will give me a good excuse to come back and watch the video. I really do appreciate you.
Thanks for joining, Newman.
So much.
Good to see
Yeah.
you.
Thanks for
See you
joining,
later.
Newman. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
So I know the rest of you haven't read the book in depth or at all. So do you want to go through the traps? Are you interested in those?
Yeah, I think Nori, I actually have to hop off too because I thought it's gonna start 1 hour earlier. But you know, would love to talk about tragedy of commons. Would love to talk about zero-sum games, all of that, and dig deeper. I will, you know, now I have incentive to go through the book more in depth, or just buy the audiobook like Newman recommended. I think I don't know if you're down to do another book club swarm session next weekend or something like that.
Yeah, why don't we
to go through it?
Continue part 2 next weekend? Because I know this is Easter weekend too, so there's a lot of people out visiting family or doing their Eastery things, so it might not have been the best weekend. But and we also, just to put it here, have a asynchronous conversation area. So if you have thoughts and want to record a Loom video or put in some notes just to have a conversation, that's available. I'll probably put a link here to the Telegram group as well, because that's a nice place to have a conversation as well if you like text. But yeah, if you're up for it, I'm totally happy to run this again next weekend, and we can continue with system traps and then move into the Catalyst conversation.
Yeah, my Saturday mornings are reserved for Swarm until the past 2 weeks, and no Swarm meeting was happening, so I was pretty bummed. So I was really looking forward to this.
Awesome.
And the async conversations happening on Mirrorboard, right?
Yep.
Using Loom or anything else.
Yeah, anything.
And then what time does the next book club start?
We'll do it at Swarm next week. So it'll be.
Is Swarm now happening at?
It's at
9 a.m. Pacific or 10?
It's 10 a.m. Pacific because of the daylight savings.
Okay. Then I'll have to change it.
Okay. And yeah, we are an hour in, so it's probably a good place to break and carry on this conversation next. Tagain, do you have anything you want to add, or?
I was just listening. I had to run from 2 systems because I had to run some errands. So I was just listening. It was really very eye-opening. I was meant to read it, but I didn't read it. But I know I have incentive to motivation to read it. And I'll attend next week.
It's a good teaser, Nori.
Definitely. So we can talk about it. I highly recommend the audiobook. I ran it at 1.5 speed and got through a 6-hour book in like 3 or 4 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was pretty nice to go through. And then when I actually went through the Kindle version, it was really easy to take stuff out and tie stuff together. So yeah, audiobooks are a really great way to consume this. And I think Newman mentioned downloading the PDF that comes with it to look at the diagrams and stuff, because they do talk about that at the beginning. And then it gets into the juicier stuff with systems traps and things like that. So, all right. Yeah, let's carry on this conversation next week, and we'll do part 2 then. And then
yes. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys, for coming.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Enjoy. Happy Easter. Bye.
Happy Easter. Yep.